banner first. Hello, Rick. Hello.
How you doing, Sarah? Welcome to March.
Yes, hello, March. Wow, February went by so fast. It's just like it's a blink, only a blink, and it's gone.
Well, as you get older, all the months do that.
Yeah, wow. Um, any anyway, so but at least we have good weather.
Yes.
Welcome to almost spring, but we feel like spring and summer already. So today we have another wonderful topic. Today, the topic for today is the Trail of Tears. We'll talk about Trail of Tears. And before we get into the topic today, I would like to introduce our presenter today. He is a 10-time nonfiction book author and an authority on American history. He spent most of his adult life living aboard boats and has traveled far and wide in the Americas. Let's welcome Rick Rhodes. Welcome, Rick. And I forgot to introduce myself. How about that?
Well, I can't introduce you, Sarah. You have to do it yourself.
For our viewer, I'm Sarah M. I'm an author of the book How I Survived the Killing Fields, and I'm an inspirational speaker. And because I'm an author, that's why I got to know Rick. But Rick is a 10-time book author, and I am only one time. Well, I'm author 3 books now. But anyway, without any further delay, the topic for today is very interesting. The title is The Trail of Tears. Sometimes grave injustice are done. Listening to your albeit unpopular maverick might avert this in the future. So today is March 1st. Many historic and momentous events happened to Native Americans during the month of March. I suspect you are going to tell us about them. So tell us, Rick.
I sure will. I can think of four offhand. There's probably more than that. They got a favorable Supreme Court reading. They started the first journey. They finished the last journey. And there's a big battle about 6 years after Thomas Jefferson, I'm going to talk about. All happened in March. So I thought this was apropos for March 1st. Trail of Tears. Let's say what caused it, or what were the, not caused it, what were the factors running up into it. And let's start with Thomas Jefferson and the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. Uh, Jefferson purchased all this land from Napoleon, and and it was getting crowded, or so to speak, not like it is today, but it's getting crowded back east. And there was Native Americans in the southeastern United States. The southeast was growing quickly, and he said, well, let's move the Native Americans. He's thinking about this in 1803, west of the Mississippi River. Well, nothing really happened for 25 years. And Jefferson said, not a foot of the land will be taken from the Indians without their consent, and the sacredness of their rights felt by thinking persons in America. Well, that was hooey, and Jefferson knew it was hooey. Jefferson deserved to be on Mount Rushmore, probably, but he had some contradictions in his life, and this was one of them too. And nothing really happened for about 25 years. But 6 years after Jefferson left, there was an interesting battle in the War of 1812. I believe it was March, I know it was March 1814, called the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in Alabama. I had actually visited that battlefield site. And anybody who was to be anybody was fighting in that battle, including Thomas Andrew Jackson, David Crockett, not David Crockett, and Sam Houston. Houston and Crockett probably became friends in that battle, and and it basically was a fight. The Creek Nation was having a civil war, and the British were siding with one side. They called the Red Sticks Creek, and the Andrew Jackson was fighting them with other Creeks that allied with him, as well as the Cherokee. And the Cherokee saved his butt in that battle, and he didn't even acknowledge that afterward. I just read, I was preparing for this, I read a few books, and I just read an account of one minor chief in Cherokee said, if I'd known he was what it was going to do to us, within a couple of years or several years, I would have killed him right then and there. And instead he saved his life. And, I don't blame this guy for saying that about Jackson. Jackson was, I don't like him. I don't like Andrew Jackson. He'll never make a book of mine. But so he was, the War of 1812 was interesting. And one of the interesting people in there, the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in the War of 1812 was a crippled Cherokee named Sequoia. He got the name Sequoia because his foot was it means pig's foot. His foot was deformed. And he noticed in that battle that the white men were using talking leaves. They were reading and writing letters, correspondence. He said, wow, we can't do that. The Cherokees had a spoken language and the white men had a written language. He realized that his Cherokee were basically illiterate and he wanted to do something about it. And so he worked on 12 years on creating a Cherokee alphabet. And it's distilled the sounds in that it's called a syllabary, what he did. It comes to speaking language, going back to a written language. And he distilled the Cherokee the language into 86 characters. And they said, you never do this. You're a fool. You worked up 12 years. You're never going to make this work. And he went to a powwow and the chief says, okay, you write down your speech and I'll write it down on my Cherokee alphabet. And yeah, all right, Sequoia. Well, anyway, he did, and he recited it back to him, and they go, holy cow. And it was really relatively easy for the average Cherokee to learn Sequoia's alphabet, even though it took him 12 years to basically come up with it. The average Cherokee could learn it in a half a week. It was really, really easy. So the Cherokees he made his whole nation literate very quickly, but he worked on it for a long, long time. It's a great story, and he was able to do that. But Jackson didn't have any gratitude to the Cherokees. When they got back from the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, their farms in North Georgia were all, the fences were wrecked. Their crops were ruined by the Georgia militia mostly. Even the women were violated. And then, no gratitude for these people that saved his neck. And there's a lot of interesting people born in that Battle of Horseshoe Bend. Now, what the Trail of Tears basically, it did remove some Indians in the Northeast, but I'm going to focus, that was a small thing. But the big thing was the 5 civilized tribes in the Southeast. The Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creeks, and the Seminoles here in Florida. And the plans, like I said, Jefferson was thinking that out, and he didn't do much. But I had to interject the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in there, and you'll see why. And then comes President Jackson comes in 1828. And in the meantime, the Cherokees were, the reason why they call them civilized tribes is because they took on Christianity. They took on white man's mores, a full system of government, and did everything the white man asked. They did everything. John Ridge, one of the Cherokees, said something like, "You ask us to throw off our hunter warrior state, we did so. You ask us to form a republican government, we did so, adopting yours as a model. You asked us to cultivate the earth and learn the mechanics arts, we did so. You asked us to learn to read and write, we did so. You asked us to cast away our idols and worship your God, we did so." So the Cherokees, they did everything the white man asked them. And what's going to happen is really pretty bad. But one of the things the Cherokees were doing, in the 1810s or something like that, they were sending some of their brightest and best to school up in New England, Cornwall, Connecticut. this guy, John Ridge, who I just read, a guy named Elias Boutineau, who took on the name of the man who paid for his financing. Elias Boutineau, the first, was actually one of the presidents, one of the 8 presidents in the Articles of Confederation of the United States. And another guy, and Americans could go to that too, and there's a missionary from Vermont named Samuel Worcester, and he went to that. And he became good friends with Elias Boutineau, but the school didn't last too long because the Cherokee men, 2 of them, the guy John Ridge and Elias Boutineau, were enthralled with white women, the daughters of the professors, and vice versa. The women were enthralled with them, and then we Boutineau and John Ridge married women from the school, and that people in Connecticut, as open-minded as they were, said, no, enough of that. We can't have these exotic dark-skinned men come up here and take our women, so we have to close the school down. Had high ideals, but it fell apart because the ideals probably weren't high enough. Anyway, I don't know how you can judge that any way you want. But after that happened, Worcester, who became a good friend with Boutineau, and the first thing Boutineau did was started a Cherokee newspaper called the Cherokee Phoenix, and with Worcester's help, he got a printing press, and Worcester translated the Bible into that Cherokee language for Cherokees. So, I mean, these people were doing a lot of good stuff. And Worcester realized that if the Cherokees can't come up here to get educated, I found my mission. I'm going to go down south to Cherokee lands and help them. And he did the rest of his life. He was known as the messenger. He was the postmaster and had several other jobs that matched his skills up in New England. And he's a good white guy. I mean, this is a horrible story, but I try to find good people in a horrible story. And Worcester's one of them, and there's a couple more coming up. But despite how bad our country is, there's always good people doing things. And I think you need to tell these stories and tell them, unvarnished how bad it really was for the Cherokees. Well, after the school, that school closed down and Worcester went south. And in 1829, there's a governor of Georgia, George Gilmer. I won't even drive through Gilmer County, Georgia. It's in North Georgia. I drive around it. But they found gold in the mountains where the Cherokee lived. And the Georgia people said, oh, we don't want the Cherokees to have it. We'll give us, they were greedy. They said, kick the Cherokees out and mess up their laws and get our white people down there to we want that land. And we don't want to give, the Cherokees can't even mine for their own gold, paying for their own gold. And they did. And let's see here. So Governor Gilmer was not a nice character. And he passed a law, the Georgia passed a law they were doing everything to annihilate the Cherokees, probably a good word. And he said, if we don't, there's missionaries down there. Matter of fact, there were 11 of them. And he said, we don't even want them to go on down there because they're educating the Cherokee. And what we'll do is we'll pass a law. When they go into Cherokee territory, they have to have a Georgia license. And then we can deny that license once they do it. So that's exactly what he did. He passed, among many draconian measures, he passed a license that said anybody going into Cherokee territory has to get this Georgia license. And then when these 11 missionaries went down there, said, we're not giving it to you. They went down there anyway. And then the Georgia enforcement authorities threw these 11 missionaries in jail, 4 years of hard time. Jesus, tell me how, that's the type of guy Gilmer was. And then Gilmer says, well, we'll pardon you if you just leave and don't come back. And 9 of the 11 missionaries said, yeah, I'm sorry, I'd like to help with Cherokees, but this is too much. And they took the pardons and left. And 2 of them would not. Worcester, who's a friend of Boutineau, another guy named Dr. Eliza Butler. And they did 4 times in the jail. And the reason why they didn't take the pardon, it's coming up here. There was the longest serving attorney general in the United States was a guy named William Wirt. He was attorney general for Presidents Monroe and John Quincy Adams, and another good guy, another good white guy. And he took the Cherokee case. He says, well, this is BS what George is doing to the Cherokees. We'll take it to the court. Maybe we'll get to the Supreme Court. Well, it reached the Supreme Court twice. The first case, 1830 something, and it said that Georgia, you can't do this. And Georgia said, we don't have any, no engine's going to bring us to the Supreme Court. And the case was dismissed. And about a year later, because of the Georgia, there's a lot of reasons. I'm not a legal guy. And a year later, they took it again to the Supreme Court. This was Worcester and Butler. They took their case to the Supreme Court. And over some deliberation, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Cherokee. And the Cherokee were jubilant. They said, we won in the highest court of the land in the U.S. Supreme Court. And this is what the longest serving Supreme Court justice said. The Cherokee Nation is a distinct community occupying its own territory with the boundaries accurately described, in which the citizens of Georgia have no right to enter but with the assent of only the Cherokee themselves. So the Cherokee is one of the highest court in the land. They said, so all the missionaries could go back and they could stay there, and they could, Worcester could be postmaster and all that. And then it goes to President Andrew Jackson at the time, and he says, well, he snickered. Well, Chief Justice Marshall made his decision. Now I'll let him try to enforce it. Now we have three branches of government, which is a good idea: legislative, court, and executive, the president. But the president has to enforce it. And if the president won't enforce what the Supreme Court says, geez, we are really and that's what in bad shape. And that's what Jackson did. And I can't stand the man personally. And that's not all he did. But so the Cherokees won, but they didn't win because the president whose butt was saved in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend wouldn't follow the law. In his inaugural address in 1929, Jackson said this: these Indians have neither the intelligence, the industry, nor the moral habits to survive, and must yield to our superior race and disappear. Now, if that's not close to genocide, I don't know what is. This is our U.S. president, the first Democrat, as Andrew Jackson. He did that. And the Cherokees did everything right, but they couldn't, they were. And then, so what happens to the Cherokees? They're like getting split. They're like, well, this is modern America. Is they really going to do this to us? Make us leave without, and then 90% of the Cherokees believe this chief was a longstanding chief, made a lot of money, John Ross. And a smaller number, about 10% of them, believed in a guy named John Ridge, who, and along with Elias Boudinot, and Ridge's son, John Ross, the one I just quoted a while back, and saying, man, this is not good. This is not good at all. And they didn't know what to do. So there's two factions in the Cherokees. 90% said, let's not move. And 10% said, we better start getting in gear here and moving. And so they signed a treaty of New Echota. It's near Rome, Georgia. That's where Marjorie Taylor Greene now lives, in Rome, Georgia. And they signed a treaty with, the government that said, okay, we'll leave and we'll head off to Oklahoma where you want us to go. And they left. And then that's another great part, that they signed that treaty, but it had to be ratified in the U.S. Congress. And I think it was May 1836. Supposed to be ratified in Congress. And there's a good story about David Crockett. We did talk about David Crockett half a year ago. Right. He was a good soul. I love David Crockett. Not David. David Crockett's a Walt Disney creation. David Crockett rushed back, even though his grandparents were killed by Native Americans, rushed back to Washington and throw his vote in favor of letting annulling that treaty was no good. You could see the one-sidedness of that treaty, as many people did. John Quincy Adams, who I talked about last week, same one. And the treaty only passed by one vote. And that's very interesting to me because, so the average people in Congress were not that, the people in Georgia were worse than the people in Congress. People in Congress did not almost ratify the treaty, but they ratified by one vote in Congress. David Crockett's rush there didn't quite make it not happen. But he tried well. David Crockett, said, the hell with Congress, the hell with the people of Tennessee, I'm going to Texas. And then within a month, he was killed in the Alamo. And his friend Sam Houston, who he met in Horseshoe Bend, said, come on down to Texas. Enough of that Washington politics stuff. He goes down to Texas at 50 years old, and he fought in the Alamo and was killed there. But So the Cherokees did everything right, and they're split, and they're listening to two factions. Well, when that treaty got passed in May of 1836, 10% of the Cherokees, Major Ridge, Major Ridge's son, and Elias Boudinot, and missionary Samuel Worcester, and Sequoyah, let's head to Oklahoma before things get worse. And they also saw how the Creeks were left, and they were treated very poorly when they were in chains. And when ships sank, they lost 300 Creek. So they went to Oklahoma, and that was, I guess you'd call that the Trail of Tears too. They weren't happy about it, but they left. So 90% of the Cherokee are still in Georgia, North Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee area, near Chattanooga, or actually Rome, Georgia. That's where, that northwestern part of Georgia, most of them. And so the chief said, well, John Ridge is now the sole chief. He was happy to see the Ridge faction, as what they could call them, go. And I'll fight this myself. And he went to Congress and he said, you can't pass that treaty, and it's no good. And they said, yeah, we're going to pay. It's passed. You got to give us more money. Well, they didn't. It did. And before you know it, they had 2 years from the treaty signed in May to leave. And 2 years passed, and the Cherokee 90% were not making any plans to leave. And then they said, you got to get out of here. And they sent a general down there, John Wool, who was a hero in the Battle of War of 1812, a good guy. And he saw the Georgia, he called them the Georgia vultures. I'm not using that. I'm not making that up. That was what he said. He said, gosh darn, I got to protect the Cherokee from the Georgia vultures. And they were putting stockades. And he was trying to be kind to them. And it didn't always work. And he was relieved, replaced by Stony Winfield Scott. Winfield Scott did his job very stonily and got him out of there. And he delayed him a little bit when the weather got bad. And it was horrible. It was hot. It was wet in the spring, hot in the summer, cold in the winter. And things did not go well. Let's see. And so David Crockett's, John Ross's contingent, 90% of them. There's several routes. There's a river route, there's Benji's route, and there's several others. But the northern route is the most notorious. There's a couple centers there. I visited them all up in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And they lost a quarter of their population, mostly to disease and their malnutrition. They had food with tainted meat. They had weevils in their food. And many people took advantage of them and charged them tolls to cross the land. But again, I'm looking for good people. Some white settlers said, here's some blankets. And there's an interesting story near Cape Girardeau, Missouri. 2 little children who lost their parents. Some white people came by and saw the predicament. So they were coming, and they raised them, took them aside and raised them and got them off the Trail of Tears. And they arrived at Oklahoma. I'm leaving a lot out. And when they arrived, the other group was already there for over a year plus, and they were making things, making a fairly good living. They were called the Old Settlers, and the group by Ross was called the Late Immigrants. Well, within 3 months after the last group, which was also in March, 1839, arrived in Oklahoma, Ross wanted to consolidate his power. And in June, there was an assassination party of 25 to 30 people. They killed Ross in front of his family, John Ross. Boudinot's head was split open. He was killed. And John Ridge was killed in front of his family. Major Ridge was shot and killed. So what's happening now? A Cherokee Civil War. So a promising government of the Cherokee Nation was in tatters because of how this was handled, mostly by the white Americans. But you can say the Cherokees they had problems themselves. It was a horrible thing. And, it's just, like I say, I read these 3 books on it: Cherokee Tragedy, Trail of Tears, and another Trail of Tears book. And what happened was, how the heck did this happen in modern America? But it did. And I'll read it. I'll close, and you can ask me a few questions because we weren't kind of running over time here. And this is a quote by Clarence Darrow: "True patriotism hastens justice in his own land more than anywhere else." And that's how I feel about it. And it's a sad story. And the Cherokee are, they're back together now and they're in Oklahoma. But someone went out in the woods and stayed in North Carolina, And there was a little town called Cherokee, North Carolina, where there's a handful of Cherokees living today, a small percentage of them that went away. So I'll close it there with the Clarence Darrow quote. Okay, Sarah, you can pop me with some questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Rick. Wow, so much history behind everything. All
Oh,
right. Yeah. So, my first question for you, do you think the Cherokee could have done anything differently to have avoided their awful fate?
I have gotten this question a few times when I used to give this hour presentation, and I thought about it a lot. And I said, yes, one thing they could have done. They were the most educated Native Americans in the Southeast by far, without a doubt, but they weren't educated quite enough. And something
Mm,
like that today, if they had listened, if all of them had listened to Major Ridge and Ada Elias Boudinot, it wouldn't have been so bad. So they weren't that they were educated, but they weren't educated enough. And I do believe in education, and this is a prime example of it.
mm, okay. Is the Cherokee alphabet still being spoken and written today?
You know, when I first started doing this program about 20 years ago, there were 25,000 Cherokee speakers. Today, there's only 2,000. I just checked it. It's really going down. It hasn't, you can see the 86, you can go online and find the 86 character alphabet. So that's really gone down. And when they were giving COVID vaccines out recently in the Cherokee Nation, they gave them first to the people that knew the Cherokee language and could translate it, which I think is pretty cool. So barely, to answer your question, it's going downhill fast.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh, that's so bad, so sad.
it is.
Well,
I think it is.
yeah. My last question. Native Americans have contributed much to our nation's defense during wartime. Tell us a little more about that, Rick.
Oh, holy heck. Absolutely. I mean, they have more Medal of Honors per capita, more Purple Hearts, more people killed who are Native Americans. One of the Marine living, 6 Marines and 5 Marines and Navy corpsmen who raised the flag on Iwo Jima. One was a Pima Indian from Arizona, Ira Hayes. Johnny Cash did a song about him. He became an alcoholic after the war and died. Ernest Evans, he was a Cherokee from Oklahoma. He was a Annapolis graduate and he was given a crappy destroyer during World War II, the USS Johnson, and that ship did some heroics in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, a sub battle called Sumar Straits. And you read the story about that battle. Another great Cherokee, the Navajo Code Talkers. And if you remember last November during Native American History Month, I gave a story about another World War II hero, Chief Joseph Medicine Crow. So the Native Americans definitely have contributed to armed forces at a higher percentage than any other group, and they got more medals to prove it. Medals of honor. So yes, we should cherish the Native Americans, and it's a wonderful story, and what we did to them is very sad, but we still have time to correct things. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Rick. That was a story that a lot of people didn't know or didn't want to hear about it.
Yeah, and you know, it's a terrible story in many ways, but there are some heroes there. Wirt, the other one begins with a W, and then David Crockett. So I mean, you know, you got to hear these stories, and there are good white people out there that are in these bad stories, and we got to know their story too. You know, so yeah, it is a terrible story, but let's tell those terrible stories and say to people that did the right thing within that thing. That's important. We can't quash that, as far as I'm concerned. I'll fight to do it, and you know, not to quash it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for preparing this story to tell us and all the historical background. Oh, I want to show the map.
Oh yeah, the sort of 5 tribes, where they
Yeah,
were and how they all went to Oklahoma between 1836 and 1839.
yeah. Let me find that map.
National Geographic map. There's several of them. You can find this on the internet, but I can't just show a map because this was National Geographic. There we go.
Here
You
we
can see
go.
the Seminoles down south. You can see the Cherokee with the blue, and that the route they showed, the blue route is the northern route. That was the horrible route, and then you had the yellow was the yellow, the creek. Yeah, they were there, and then the Chickasaw, and Chickasaw and who, somebody else on there we're missing.
Yeah.
But they're in Mississippi, southeast United States. But that's the route they all went to Oklahoma. The Oklahoma flag today has all the elements of the Native Americans, the eagle feathers, the peace pipe, and called the calumet, and the buffalo shield.
Awesome. Wow, we made it.
All right.
30 minutes. Went by so quickly.
Yeah, for me, I could tell you, I would love to tell you another 30 minutes. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Rick. And I look forward to hear more story on the 15th, right? It's yeah, that's right. The next,
I think I'll do, since it's March and March Madness, I think I'll do the John Wooden. I couldn't stand him in college because he won too much, but he was a really classy guy. I'll talk about him, during college basketball season, March Madness.
March Madness.
We'll go to wholly different, talking about that 18th, 19th century. We're going to go back to almost the 21st century. So not quite the 21st century.
Right. Well, thank you everyone for watching. Whether you are watching live or on a replay, we appreciate you, and we love to hear your comment. If you watch on a replay, we still can see your comments. So don't hesitate to post and to ask anything. All right. Well, with that, goodbye for now, and see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.
Bye, Rick.
See you, Sarah.